Hello, my name is David Plylar, and I'm one of the producers with Concerts from the Library of Congress. It is my great pleasure to be here with pianist Adam Golka, who will be performing as part of our Rehearing Beethoven Festival. This festival was initially conceived as a way to hear a variety of Beethoven's works in different guises, including all nine symphonies in smaller formats that could fit in our Coolidge Auditorium. When the pandemic hit, we had to change gears, and we're trying to present these unique pieces in a different guise in your own homes. We're very happy that Adam is here to perform as part of our Hammerklavier project, which includes a performance of the piano version as well as the string quartet version. Welcome, Adam. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be part of this.
Well, Adam will probably be surprised to know that we've asked him to play the string quartet version for us instead of the piano one. But no, I'm just kidding. We won't do that to you. But we are extremely excited about this performance. This piece has a particularly special meaning to us at the library because we have a number of sketch leaves in Beethoven's hand, the holograph manuscripts at the Library of Congress, including a few that we just recently acquired in the past few years. So from the third and fourth movements. So those are available online that you can check out if you haven't already. But before we get started talking about the piece, I'm wondering, you have this really rich background in terms of just your own Beethoven performance. And I'm wondering if you could just tell us a bit about the work that you've done with Beethoven over the years.
Thank you, David. First of all, I just wanted to say I'm so disappointed that I don't get to experience the string quartet version in person. It's one of the things that I was waiting for months to experience. So there's a bit of sadness around that. But yes, my Beethoven journey, well, I mean, like most, it started in childhood, of course, with pieces that everybody learns when they're learning the piano. But I suppose I was about 14 or 15 when I became more interested in Beethoven's sonatas, particularly the Hammerklavier. Actually, that was sort of the drawing point for me. And I learned the Hammerklavier around that time as a teenager and performed it once or twice. I mean, just the notes. I mean, I hardly knew what I was doing, but I was so overwhelmed and intrigued by it that I wanted to understand more. And that led me to learning the other sonatas. At some point, I felt like my understanding of the Hammerklavier was very incomplete because I didn't know the other sonatas as well. So I learned all of them, and that was actually just around the time that I also experienced the complete string quartets in live concert. I at a festival, I experienced the whole cycle, and that absolutely changed my mind and made me very committed to my work on Beethoven.
Well, that's fascinating. You've done, and so have you performed all the entire sequence of sonatas as part of a series? Or are you in the process of recording them, or what are your plans for those? Just performing them as much as you can, given our current circumstances? I mean, I understand it's a difficult situation.
A little bit of everything. So I initiated the project of recording all of them last year. Actually, my new album was just released this month, a few days ago, and that's Beethoven Sonatas Volume 1, which is the Opus 10 and 13 sonatas. And I hope to continue that very soon with Volumes 2, etc. I did record the Hammerklavier, actually, about 10 years ago, and I hope to do it again, but I will wait until I've recorded the other 31 first. And also, live performance has been a part of it. Actually, I just flew to Orlando, which was my first time to get on an airplane since COVID started. And I spent 3 weeks there playing the whole cycle 3 times for a limited audience. Originally, it was supposed to be 1 performance of each sonata, but only 25 people were allowed into the auditorium. So I agreed to triple that, and we did 3 performances of each sonata, which meant about 2 recitals per day with changing programs. It was intense, to say the least, but it was an absolutely incredible experience, and I was overjoyed just to play for people. So yes, performing the sonatas live is very much part of the equation now. I'm doing it again in Houston next month for also a very limited audience, and then in New York throughout the spring in ways that are yet to be determined whether there be an audience or not, or just streamed. I'm really very excited to play the sonatas that I've been working on for people as much as possible, so that I can grow with them.
Sure. I imagine that's got to be, to not have that sort of immediate feedback has got to be a real challenge for all artists of performing artists of all types right now. And one thing before I forget, I just want to mention, I really admire your earlier recording of the Hammerklavier, and not only because of the excellent playing and it's just an excellent recording, but also because you paired it with Brahms first piano sonata. And that I always thought that people should do that, and I never understood why they didn't. But it brings out that that slight, not in a grand scale homage that Brahms has to the Hammerklavier, but it kind of makes it quite clear that there's this relationship there, where he's nodding to his predecessor. But so I really appreciate that programming as well.
Well, thank you. I had that idea for some time to juxtapose the Hammerklavier and the Brahms first sonata, which of course in just the opening rhythm, the relationship is already so clear of tribute. But actually in other ways too, to Beethoven, I imagine the Waldstein could also be programmed together, because the opening of the Brahms first sonata features the exact same harmonic twist that the Waldstein does by going from C major to B flat major right away. So had I a little bit more stamina, I might even include the Waldstein in one program.
That's fantastic. I like that idea. Well, getting into the Hammerklavier, I mean, this is it's a massive piece, and it's one of those pieces that I feel like it's kind of one giant technical and artistic risk just waiting to be taken. Like it's whenever you're playing it, and you have a particular way of I guess I'd love to know your way of approaching it. I mean, I have my audible version of you, and I've seen now I've seen the video of you playing it, but I'm curious about your approach to tackling such a large work, and maybe we can get into some of the details too.
Well, it's been a process for sure. I mean, I'm pushing 20 years of practicing the piece. Which, of course, according to Beethoven himself, is not enough, because he said that it would give pianists something to practice for 50 years. And depending on how you understand that, I think maybe even 200 and whatever 10 years has not really been enough for anybody. But yes, I mean, I think there are so many aspects to playing the piece that I feel like any day I practice it is sort of a self-discovery, because there are of course technical obstacles that are not really meant to be easy. I mean, one can think of just the very opening, which I choose to play with one hand. Oftentimes pianists redistribute the very first leap, which when I hear great performances by pianists who play it that way, it does not bother me. But I've also learned that I'm the kind of person who will not sleep at night if I take the easy road. So unfortunately I have to suffer and try to play it with one hand. But of course, the technical side of it is just, I can't really be separated from the other challenges, which are conceptual in terms of comprehension. I think of the fugue and its absolutely wild theme, which is difficult enough just to comprehend in its very first exposition, but then it becomes almost unrecognizable immediately, and he uses every possible idea in the book and every modulation and such a otherworldly fantasy to create something that even with years of study, it's not completely comprehensible. So I always ask myself, as I try to understand it more and more, at some point I also release that and let go and say, well, maybe I'm not really meant to understand this completely. So that's part of the game that I feel that I've played with the piece, which also applies to the Adagio Sustanuto, which is in a sense the real challenge of the piece, because for nearly 20 minutes there has to be such emotional focus and emotional poignancy to a piece that has an unending sense of line, exquisite detail, and pathos, which is hard to sit through for, I think, performer and listener alike. It's painful music, really painful music. So figuring out how to be with that, but also be in a sense above it, is a big part of the daily task.
Sure. It seems like you have you're not risk averse when it comes to the way that you perform, and which I really admire. And like you're saying with the choices at the beginning of the piece, you're willing to just go for it. And I think that comes through in the playing. And like you say, it's not just a technical question; it's also an artistic and musical one, and just a question of shape of the entire work. One of the things that I think is kind of fascinating about the piece is that introduction to the finale, where you have this thing that's sort of like an unmeasured prelude or something. Like it's hinting back at what a discovery of a fugue might have been, or something like that. Like how do you get into this? How do you get away from that music from the slow movement into this thing? It seems like that's kind of a ripe place. I mean, it's literally unmeasured in a sense in that sequence. Is that kind of that sort of a fantasia element, which you find in other works of Beethoven too? Is that something that you play with differently each time you perform it? Is it something that you kind of develop a trajectory with it, or what's your approach to that section?
Interesting. Well, the Largo that introduces the fugue, more and more I feel the notation is very incomplete. As complex as it is on the page, it's very incomplete in the sense that absolutely it has to capture the spirit not only of improvisation but of creation in a sense. And I think after the slow movement, which has almost a hypnotic steadiness, there has to be a sense of discovering life from one moment to the next, and I take the markings a little bit more with a grain of salt than I used to, because I think he was trying to notate something that was really unnotatable. And just the way it looks visually to me suggests that. I mean, it looks like a page from a piece by Pierre Boulez or something. And I mean, it's so complex. And I'm trying to get at the spirit of what he meant. And I think every day it's a little bit different somehow. And it depends how the piece was played before that. It's very different to play it by itself and very different to play it after all the emotion of the Adagio.
With the fugue, I mean, that's always, I mean, I look at this piece and I'm kind of astounded by each movement in its own way. But the fugue in particular is one that it just strikes me as a particular challenge to be able to bring off in a way just over the span of time that it occurs, and it seems like you do so brilliantly. And I'm wondering if there's any was it ever a struggle for you to kind of to come to terms with the piece and to make sense of it to yourself so that you felt more comfortable conveying it, or was this one of those pieces because you started so early with it, it's just kind of blossomed with you as you grew as a pianist?
That's an interesting question. I read a funny article recently about teaching judo, and I learned that a good teacher sort of makes sure that when they award a certain belt to somebody, that they know that they can defeat everybody with a lower color belt, so that there's a sense of confidence developing from where you are at. So I would say that with the Hammerklavier, I think my experience is one of the fact that at first I simply survived a few performances of the Hammerklavier, and I think my body probably just learned that, well, this doesn't feel comfortable, but you did it last time, so you can probably do it again. And probably 30 or 40 performances later, I walk out on stage feeling usually utterly confused how I'm going to do what I'm going to do. It never feels safe at all. But somehow I have the belief that, I've done it. I can do it. And that's the best way I can explain it, because I think the fugue will never be easy. I don't think it's meant to be. I mean, some of it is just absolutely unrealistic to play. And actually, it's easier to play with the excitement of a concert than at home alone, without the motivation to survive in a way. So, which is a funny thing. That's an interesting thing.
The piece, of course, has a challenging performance history, to say the least. That it wasn't even premiered publicly until, I think, listed it in 1836. And do you just looking at it from the standpoint of your colleagues who are also pianists, is it something that you find more and more people are willing to take on these days, or is it not such a kind of bugbear in the repertoire as it once was?
Seems like it. I mean, I feel like I see it played or listed on programs more often than maybe when I first learned it, but still, I mean, I think it will never have the same popularity as, let's say, a Waldstein or a Pathetique or something, by sheer virtue of the fact that it requires a little bit more than half a recital program. So I think in that sense, it requires such a commitment from everybody involved that it's everybody has to be willing to go on that spiritual journey. And I think in a sense it really is. It's a big commitment, and that's why it's so incredibly rewarding, because everybody has to invest effort and time and concentration, not just the performer.
Definitely. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about Hammerklavier or your Beethoven performances in general?
Well, I have a question actually that I've been meaning to ask you, which is, I've been so curious about the string quartet version, and I've been curious about the first note, which is below the scale of the cello. So I've been wondering whether the piece is transcribed, or whether the B flat is an octave higher. I've been dying to know that and ask you that. So
it's all transposed up a whole step, so it's in C major.
It's in C major. Okay, how interesting. And then the slow movement is therefore in minor.
So in G sharp. So it's the whole thing is up a whole step, and it just seemed like the only way to make it happen. And and this is actually, it's an interesting segue, because I discovered your work as a transcriber as well. You do. I came across your La Mer for two pianos, which I really enjoyed. I had a chance to listen to that, and I have a couple of questions about that. But for those who aren't familiar with it, I found it on your website. There's some really fantastic things right in the beginning at the first movement, where there's some inside the piano muting, and then this incredibly dramatic decision to lift the piano desk along with the lid, and this kind of remarkable crescendo that was absolutely effective, I thought. And so, is this something that you do a lot of, and is it? Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, I'll confess, I did dabble a lot in transcribing and arranging when I was a teenager. There was a time that I wanted to make a virtuoso transcription of every piece of music ever written for any instrument, and I was sort of obsessed with doing that, with mostly for the goal of showing off. And that was sort of before I really discovered Beethoven in a big way. And then I sort of decided that was not a very serious thing to do, to make virtuoso transcriptions, which I've changed my mind about since. But I stopped doing that and focus on more serious endeavors. And then I decided that actually it was a great thing to do, and I really wanted to go back to it. So La Mer came out of the fact that I love that piece so much. I've been obsessed with La Mer for so long, and I always wanted to play it. I thought, I mean, I do conduct a little bit, but I'm not a conductor, and I don't have an ambition to become a conductor. So I thought, okay, I'm probably never going to get to play La Mer. I don't play any of the instruments in the orchestra that would be part of it. So there was some kind of frustration that I just really wanted to deal with. And I thought, well, I really want to sit down at the piano and play it. And I started exploring the idea of doing it for two hands. And I quickly realized that this is not going to work. I mean, I could make it work, but it will take all the pleasure out of the details that I adore. So then I started conceptualizing, well, if I have two pedal mechanisms, two different resonances, pianos facing each other, and the advantage of having that sense of space created by two pianos, how creative could I get in trying to recreate the missing color spectrum of the orchestra? And I came up with some things playfully that I think they did work rather well. And but I'm not quite sure how I thought of it. It just sort of came to me. And one of those ideas was to lift the lid during the opening crescendo, so that at first the sunrise as it's happening is very muted, and then suddenly blossoms into a kind of dazzling splendor.
I thought it was very effective. And one thing I would say about this notion of the virtuosity here is that virtuosity in this case is kind of achieving this very special sonic purpose. I think it's not, I wasn't listening to it saying, although I could have, very much been just in awe of the pianistic ability of you and your partner, but it was more just like, this is in the service of the particular sound world that you're trying to create. And so it's with excellent transcriptions, that's usually what I feel is happening, is that the virtuosity is there by necessity as a way of to kind of make the sound happen in a particular way, especially in this kind of music like with Debussy, where there's just, you have to kind of invest a lot physically in order to make the effects happen the way that you have them happen. But you also had certain types of orchestrational details that, like certain types of strums and other types of choice muting and things like that would give timbral shifts that I thought were, like the equivalent of what you might find with a stopped horn or something like that, but not necessarily equating that to what you'd find in Debussy's score, but as a way to adapt for the new medium in a meaningful and effective way. So I definitely admired that.
Thank you very much. I tried as much as possible not to be literal about it, but rather to think of the total effect. So I'm humbled if there was, some success or pleasure from that. But I am so curious to hear, I mean, the Hammerklavier with string quartet, and I have so many questions about it, but I wonder if I should just listen to it, and I guess I'll have the chance to do so online.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Curious about whether the una corda instructions translate to a mute or not.
So yeah, that's a good question. Originally, yes, and then there were certain issues that come up with respect to how to keep the sounds matched between the strings if you have to gradually release them, so gradually take off the mutes. And so so in the end, there's this one particular section where it ended up having just like prescribing a sotto voce type of approach, so that people are going for the character of the una corda, but not necessarily the direct muting. But there's still other places where that is used. It just kind of depends on the situation. Plus how you use pizzicati and things like that. And so and also how to deal with the pedal and certain types of sustained things that you want, but without going overboard that was definitely a challenge for sure. So yeah. I was going to ask you one other thing, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, I know. Well, first of all, Adam, I'd like to thank you for speaking with me about all these things, and the Hammerklavier in particular, which is a piece I've always wished I could play. And I think that this is one of those things that when we talk about transcriptions, it's a way of getting into a piece that we're not able to play. So maybe my doing a string quartet version is a way for me to participate in the piece when I couldn't do so directly. But I'm wondering, I know that right now things are quite unclear as to what's going to happen in the immediate future, but I'm wondering if you have some specific plans for down the road, or particular types of repertoire that you think that you're going to explore further beyond Beethoven, or will it still be a focus on Beethoven for now, or what kinds of plans do you have?
Well, I think that if the pandemic era has taught me one thing, it's to not make too many long-term plans. So, which actually has been kind of a beautiful thing about this period, is that I feel more in touch with what I would like to do, right now, and not necessarily in 2022. So I will divulge the secret that after I returned from Orlando and playing the whole Beethoven cycle 3 times, I've thought for a while I couldn't bring myself to really work on any Beethoven. I needed a break, and so I found myself suddenly obsessed with Ravel and Rachmaninoff and all these things that couldn't be further from Beethoven. And but that's sort of spontaneous. That's just for my own pleasure. And in long-term plans, of course, Beethoven. I mean, the 32 sonatas for me are it's a process. It's a process, and every time I play them, it's just a further step in the process. So I have absolutely very long-term plans with playing them, recording them whenever possible. But I'm trying not to be too stubborn about those plans, because I want to make sure that we're all safe and things get to some kind of normal soon. So that's probably the best I can answer now. But it is also good in this time, I find, that there is suddenly time to explore things that I wasn't exploring as much. For instance, I've become more deeply acquainted with all of Beethoven's string quartets in this time than I was before, because suddenly I had more time to stare at the scores and listen to many recordings over and over, and become more acquainted. And I'm not making any transcriptions yet, but you never know.
Oh, fantastic. I heard that pianist Paul Lewis told me at one point that Mussorgsky had made some transcriptions of Beethoven quartets.
Really? I didn't know
yeah.
that.
And I haven't been able to find them either. I need to look into it further just to check that out. But
that's very interesting.
One thing I did want to mention to you is that once we're in a situation where the library is open again and able to have people, you of course have an open invitation to come and check out our holdings, because we do have a lot of not just Beethoven, but a lot of Brahms and Rachmaninoff, basically everything after 1916, which unfortunately he wrote most of the stuff before 1916, but still there's a good amount of stuff there. But Beethoven, we have Opus 109, the holograph manuscript, and a lot of late Brahms, early Brahms too, actually, well, early-ish Brahms, the Handel variations and things like that. So I'd love to be able to show them to you someday, and a lot of it is actually available online, already scanned, so at least you can see that, even though we're in this kind of remote situation.
Well, seeing those things in person when I've had the privilege to do them in other places has been really transformative. So I'm kicking myself that I've never made it to the Library of Congress in person. I've never been, actually. So that would actually be a dream come true, and the kind of thing that would really make a big impression, I'm sure.
Well, we'll look forward to that. And I'd like to thank you again so much for speaking with me today, and best of luck to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.